Hi, Garen Tim here. Hope you enjoy this podcast thanks to Sportsbet's new iPhone app. The easiest betting app just got easier. Download it now and gamble responsibly. The gambling helpline is 1-800-858-858.
For a week, we talk about finals. We analyse them in all sorts of different ways. So how to offer something that's not the obvious? Craig Jennings has done that for us. So themes, strategies, tactics, a bit of a deep dive. It mightn't be for everyone, but the way it resonated last week around some of the themes that came forward, I wonder while you were watching whether you were thinking, oh, control or catapult? What's holding sway here? Is that horizontal or vertical? Who's Musashi and who's Musashi? And will bludgeon ball beat Beirut ball? That was a little of what we put before you last week. Time to run the checklist on what happened and then set the themes for the semis. Craig, welcome back to SEN.
Thanks, Jared.
All right, so let's do the checklist, shall we, from what you gave us, and we'll go through them in order. West Coast beat Essendon, the Eagles. What did you have on the checklist?
Yeah, well, we spoke last week about the importance of fast starts and a 3-goal margin in the first quarter or early in the game, and you're a 75% chance of winning. So West Coast definitely nailed that part of the game. But the thing that I found really interesting about their game was the deep entries. Now, during the 2019 season, I think teams have become obsessed with trying to find a mark inside 50, and you'll hear the term by commentators and coaches that get interviewed post-game about lowering their eyes. So they lower their eyes and try to find a mark inside 50. Now, that could be 45 metres or 50 metres from goal, which effectively has a issue with your accuracy because they're quite difficult shots. And what I noticed about West Coast was they were kicking deep entries in the first quarter, so they were going long to the goal square. Now, that has two effects. One, if they take the ball, they're in a good spot to kick a goal. And Malcolm Blight spoke about that this morning. It'd be a great podcast for anybody that missed it. But what it did was it took away an Essendon strength, which is the catapult game. Now, if you think about a football ground, it's 180 metres long. So when West Coast kick to the goal square, if they make a mistake, they make the mistake long, and Essendon have to catapult that ball 180 metres, or to get a shot from 50, they've got to catapult at 130 metres. Now, if West Coast went into that game and were lowering their eyes and taking marks around 50, but then spilling that mark, then Essendon only need to catapult that ball 130 metres to score or 80 metres to get a shot at goal. So what I really liked about the West Coast method early in the game was the deep entries, which increased their accuracy and allowed them a really strong field set up behind the ball where they got repeat entries. And if you think about the game, you usually go inside 50, 60 times a game, 50 to 60 times a game, and you score every second time you go in. So a deep entry that goes back in, you're increasing the chance of scoring. But mostly it took away an Essendon strength, which was the catapult game.
And control is on your list for West Coast as well.
Yeah, so they were a control team. They took 120 marks, and what they were able to do was once they got that margin, they got a 5-goal margin. Essendon threatened for about 5 minutes, but like we spoke about last week, that if you get 5 goals up in a game, you're probably a 97, 98% chance of winning, and the other team, being Essendon, had to chase the scoreboard, and there's risks involved in that.
So the Bombers are out. What do they leave with?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So they were 4 goals down early in the game, and the margin really didn't move for a long period of time after that. So what were their match day coaching moves that they'll reflect on that they could have made to change the look of the game? The game looked like a West Coast game and not like an Essendon game. I think in the summer they'll look at increasing their modes of scoring. So you want to keep the catapult game as a strength, but maybe add some control to that. But what's really interesting that people may not be aware of, that every year 2 teams fall out of the 8 minimum. 2 teams, sometimes 3, and usually those teams come from 5th to 8th spot on the ladder. So any team that finished 5th to 8th in the home and away season, and Essendon being one of those, are at clear risk of falling out of the 8 the following year. And the reason for that is the margin between 5th on the ladder and 14th on the ladder is pretty small. It might be a few close game wins or injuries, and then the following year that other team, or the teams that finished 9th to 14th, they basically get a softer draw than the team that finishes 5th. So in a game of small margins, finishing 5th to 8th, so you feel good for making finals, but definitely in your decision-making, you're at risk of missing finals the following year.
Collingwood, they got the fast start.
Yeah, that was an absolute fast start. And what you saw as the game went on, there was about 40 minutes where a goal wasn't scored. And this is the value of fast starts and the value of getting 5 goals up. They were able to coach the scoreboard, and absolutely in that fourth quarter, they had clock control. And I think of Lee Matthews, so he always talks about for every minute in the game that's left in the game, you can kick a goal. So the reverse of that, if you can take a minute off the clock, you've taken one goal out of the game. So what Collingwood were able to do pretty early in that fourth quarter were keep taking minutes off the clock, especially with 8 and 7 minutes to go. So I understand that Geelong get within 2 kicks, but really Collingwood were able to scoreboard coach. So in the whole second half, as much as Geelong were coming back into the game, only 5 goals were kicked. So there wasn't many goals left in the game. Both teams are really strong defensively. Now, if you're playing against, say, Brisbane, who are a really offensive team and less able to defend as well as some of the better teams, then there's probably plenty of goals still left in a game like that. But I thought Collingwood absolutely perfected scoreboard coaching and clock control in the fourth. And one thing I noticed about Collingwood is what I spoke about Western Bulldogs being the best 30-metre radius team in the competition, and that's an ability to hit targets within 30 metres. And if you miss them, you often get scored against. And I thought their 30-metre game, and it's probably a 15 or 20-metre game, those short kicks to control the clock and control the scoreboard were absolutely phenomenal. And probably most importantly, they're Pareto players, those players that have a disproportionate impact on the result, 4 to 5 players in every team. Grundy, side, bottom, Pendlebury. Now, Grundy in terms of selection for the opposition, but side, bottom and Pendlebury, absolutely phenomenal.
Geelong. So much time has been spent obsessing over this performance. What did you glean from it?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you take yourself into the match committee of Geelong, I've been involved in those for nearly 20 years at AFL level at 3 clubs. And what it would be is somebody puts up the idea that we need to take Grundy out of the game. Can we win if Grundy has an impact? And so they're trying to minimise his effect. And then it's about the coaches. They will find reasons why that decision is a good decision. But in my opinion, I don't think the decision to not play Stanley impacted the game. Possibly if he plays, they still get beaten. I thought something was far more important in that game. Now, going in, we knew that Geelong want to play long and skinny down the line. So they played their normal game style, which is to defend ball in hand, to play safe, to go long, to go skinny, to keep it to the boundary line. But what they weren't able to do, that I think they'll focus on this week, is winning those contests when it went down the line. So if you think about a game now, or when you're watching Geelong this week, they might kick skinny long down the line 30 times. So that's 30 opportunities to perfect that play. So it's a maximum benefit play. Now, if you think about a game, most games are won or lost by 4 goals. So that's just 2 goal turnarounds. Everything else might even out. So I think Geelong just didn't win enough of that skinny, long control kick down the line. And they were pretty poor in the contest early. Collingwood right on top with the heat on the game. So I think Geelong were conservative early, and they might have been thinking, let's just stay in the game early because of being blown out the previous year in a final, 3 and 5 goals down early in finals, and it's hard to play catch up. So I think all they'll focus on this week is their contest work and improve their down the line plays, their contest wins. And I think in 2017, from memory, they went over to Adelaide and got beaten and came back and unexpectedly beat Sydney. So I think what Adam Simpson says about Geelong is absolutely right. They're still a great team. They finished top for a reason, and they'll focus on their down-the-line contest work.
Craig Jennings running the finals tactical checklist. After the break, he'll set the themes for the semi-finals. The Giants, fast start, aggressive.
Yeah.
They met a few of the markers, didn't they?
Yeah, they were fast start. They were aggressive early. Now, to get a fast start, what is the formula for that? What does that look like? And really, it's everybody knowing their role, setting up from the first centre bounce. And you saw that they had targeted certain players, including Bontempelli. Everyone knew their role, and they were very aggressive early. And what I thought they did really well was deny Western Bulldogs Pareto players. So Bontempelli is the one that comes to mind. It's a really interesting thing. So most Pareto players are the players that you presume they would be. But for me, when we planned for, or in my time, planning for GWS, De Boer's actually a Pareto player. And if you think about it logically, in a schoolyard pick, he might be the 15th best player on that list. Maybe some people have him a little higher, a little lower. But every week, that 15th best player for GWS is taking out the opposition's best player. Now, that's a phenomenal result for GWS. I thought their game style in the 30-metre radius was phenomenal, and they just had a heap of vertical ball wins. So they were going deep entries inside 50. They took 5 marks early. They weren't taking as many marks later in the game, but they gave Bulldogs plenty of headaches. One thing I did like about the Western Bulldogs was the look of the game early looked wrong. So GWS got off to that fast start. But as soon as they were 3 goals down, they put Bontempelli in the ruck and English went forward and they got straight back into the game. They kicked 3 goals in 5 minutes. So by halftime, they're back into the game. But again, GWS at halftime are able to have a look at that and take that strength away, plan around it, and then they kick away on the scoreboard. Bulldogs are another team. They're at risk. They finished 5th to 8th. I think they've had a great season, or definitely a second half to the season. We know 2 teams will miss out. 92% of the teams coming in come from 9th to 14th, so they'll need to think about that in their planning.
And Richmond, who set up their 5-goal lead, they did get jumped at the start, but they did set up their 5-goal lead.
Yeah, it was interesting, that one. They got jumped at the start, but it was only a couple of goals. It never blew out to that 3 or 4 goal margin. They stayed in the game, and then once they got 5 goals up, they were able to revert to that scoreboard coaching and clock control. And what happens is the opposition start running out of time, and then they start inventing plays and getting more and more aggressive with the way they move the ball and the type of shots that they have. And then Richmond were able to score off the turnovers. Something that I think that in the review for Brisbane, they'll keep it really positive. So this was a game that's one of those outliers. Richmond kick 18 goals 4. Now, in most weeks, that's going to be 12 goals 10, 22 shots, 12-10. Brisbane, on the other hand, kicked 8 goals 17. Now, that's typically 13 goals 12. Yep. So in one sense, I think Fagan can sell the message, hey, we've had our opportunities. We matched them in it. I thought Brisbane were fantastic in the contest for most of the night. They never gave up. And he can just sell that, hey, if we're more accurate early, we're in with the show. And I think going back to Geelong, they got behind early on the scoreboard and they missed a couple of goals from directly in front as well. So that's where you have to have context on your losses. And both Brad Scott and Chris Scott, and Fagan, they won't overreact to these losses. They'll focus on the positives.
Did Bludgeon Ball beat Beirut Ball?
I think Bludgeon Ball's hard to beat. I thought Brisbane had some good tactics. So Bludgeon Ball is basically taking the ball forward at any opportunity and they're knocking it on, kicking it on, just forward momentum. And I noticed it's a little difficult on TV as opposed to live, but Hodge was always in the way. So every time they knocked it forward out of a contest, Hodge was there as a bit of a battering ram or a wall that they had to get by. And ultimately in the tactical part of the game, where you position your midfielders at stoppage, your wingers and your half-backs to deny some of that Bludgeon Ball is pretty important. But, yeah, clearly Bludgeon Ball's been around for a while and they're successful at it and they do it very well.
So that is the checklist of what took place. The real fun is in setting the themes for Geelong and West Coast, Brisbane Lions and GWS Giants. We will do that with Craig Jennings on the other side of the break. It's a tactical deep dive in September with Craig Jennings in the studio each week. We have worked through the checklist of what took place in week 1. Now let's set up the creative part of week 2. Craig, Geelong versus West Coast. What's your overall theme?
Yeah, it's interesting with themes. Last year I spoke about, or brought into the game, chaos versus control as a way of explaining 2 distinct game styles that were happening in the finals. And the reason that we do that is to basically sum up the game styles for players in a really simple way. So there's a lot of complexity behind it. Now, the way you defend a chaos team is different to the way you defend a control team. So in terms of Geelong and West Coast, they're both control teams, but they do it in slightly different ways. So what Geelong are, they're a skinny control team, and West Coast are a lateral control team. So West Coast remind me of things I've read from Bill Walsh, an NFL coach, who had a West Coast offensive system. And what that was about moving the ball laterally and then going to outside speed. So when you're watching West Coast this week, they're a lateral control team. So when they're going long down the line, that's actually a win to the opposition. When West Coast are playing really well, they'll get the ball to Hearn and he'll kick long laterally or sideways to somebody like McGovern, and eventually it goes out to a speedy winger or a speedy half forward, somebody like Gaff, and then they get you on that lateral control game, going sideways to speed outside. Now, Geelong, in contrast, they're a skinny control team. So 2 teams that love control do it different ways. And so what Geelong do is they go long down the line a lot. So it's called defending with ball in hand. A lot of short kicks in the back half and then go long down the line, and they expect to win that contest. Now, last week, Geelong didn't win, and I don't think they won enough contests down the line. And what I spoke about earlier, that there's a pattern to this game. Now, Geelong will go down the line when you're watching on TV about 30 times in this game. So that's 30 opportunities to win a down-the-line kick. So I think Geelong need to be skinny plus. So they're skinny control plus. So it's about going skinny for control, but the plus is winning the contest so that they can score from that. So the pattern in this game is down the contest line wins. So everything else will probably even out. Which team goes down the line and wins more of those contests or score from those contests? Most games are won or lost by 4 goals, so you're looking for 2 goal turnarounds there. Really clearly, Pareto players, both teams need to take out the opposition's interceptors, Stewart and McGovern. And what they do is they just give you a headache. Every time you go forward, they seem to be in the way. So basically, as a forward, you need to tag those players effectively. They're going to where the ball's going to be anyway, and just bring that ball to ground. One thing you'll notice with finals, I talked about an obsession with trying to find a mark inside 50. In finals, and particularly against West Coast and Geelong defences, it's very hard to find a mark inside 50. So how many ground ball goals can these teams get? And that's the area Geelong was so good at for much of the year that they need to bring back this week.
For those who are sitting there saying Geelong played too slow and too conservatively and they want to see a change in that, are they going to be disappointed?
I think they will be. So I think in past history, Geelong would change the way they play based on the opposition. Now, what it might be is that rather than taking 6 seconds to kick down the line, they might bring it back to 4. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but if you think about 2 seconds in very round numbers, a player can run 20 metres. So that's 20 metres extra defensively that he can run. So by going quicker, 2 seconds faster, now that defender is 20 metres or up to 20 metres out of play. So just a slight change in terms of how quickly they go down the line. But, if they get behind on the scoreboard 3 or 4 goals, then clearly they need to open up the game and change the look of the game. And that part's about scoreboard coaching.
So skinny control versus lateral control. Just give us the feel. So the Bill Walsh West Coast offence, just give us the snapshot of how that relates to West Coast as a principle.
Yeah, so Bill Walsh was a famous NFL coach, and he brought in an offensive system when he was an offensive coordinator, and basically it changed the way football or NFL football was played. And he would move down the field with a series of really short passes and lateral. And then once it got to outside speed, they'd move the ball really quickly. And I see that with West Coast, that they move the ball laterally first out of defence, and they're looking for a hole in your defence. And as soon as one opens up, they'll go. But if one doesn't, they take it basically from the left-hand side of the ground to the right-hand side of the ground. And what you know about West Coast, they've got plenty of speed. And once it gets to the right-hand side, there's not a lot of defenders out that far side of the ground because everybody's defending the left-hand side, and then they get it to speed, and then you've got some headaches. That Cripps roll as a forward racing to goal, then you've got Darling and Kennedy providing key target options. So it's just a pattern in the way they play that you're trying to take off them.
You can visualise that. The Brisbane Lions and the Giants. I like what you've done here. What's the theme here?
Yeah, so I'll start with GWS because they're an easy one. So they had a phenomenal game on the weekend. And so it's the formula. There was a formula for the way they won that game, and they need to repeat that. So if you're thinking of GWS, what are you thinking of? You're thinking that and you watched that game, you saw that they were aggressive early. You saw that they were a fast starting team. And as the game went on, they had plenty of speed coming out of stoppages, plenty of speed coming from the back line. And so to me, what we should pick up on is the Ferrari formula. So we know that they've been called the Ferraris, which in a way is a little bit about individual players and so forth, but there's a team formula. And so think about the formula, what it looks like for GWS when they win: aggressive, fast start and speed everywhere, the Ferrari formula. Now, Brisbane, I was a Fitzroy supporter, so I've got a foot in the camp there. And I used this when I was at the Western Bulldogs, and it was a Bob Murphy favourite, and it's simply rock, scissors, paper. And Brisbane need to see themselves as the rock team and GWS as the scissors team. Now, in rock, scissors, paper, rock always beats scissors. So what Brisbane need to do is be like rock set up at the stoppage to smash the GWS scissors slicing through them. So you know that GWS are a great stoppage team and they'll slice through you at stoppages. But what can you do with a rock? You can place it. And what they can do, Brisbane, is place their rocks in a certain way that impacts the way GWS can slice through at stoppages. And that might take 3 or 4 stoppage goals off the scoreboard that GWS need to find in a different way. Brisbane Rocks can set up defensively to deny GWS scissors slicing through from D50. So on the weekend, they've kicked 8 goals from the back half. They're a massive back half scoring team. Now, if we take those 8 goals off them and bring it down to 1 or 2, now GWS have to find a different mode of scoring, and have they got that in them? We saw how GWS on the weekend against Western Bulldogs absolutely assaulted them physically. So Brisbane can be rocks just smashing GWS all day long, which I think is in the makeup of Brisbane anyway. And then I think about guys like Harris Andrews. Now, he's a little bit like McGovern, but he'll spoil instead of marking the footy, and he just gets in the way of so many injuries. So Brisbane defenders can have fists like rocks against the GWS forwards. So they've got three great key forwards, and we talked about GWS last week being a vertical team. And so every time that ball comes in high, they just need big fists, those defenders, clear the area and then go the other way.
The priority in the planning, centre bounce.
I talk about in planning, there's some aspects or some plays that are maximum benefit. And all that means is if you have a good day in that area, you're going to get maximum benefit of the scoreboard. Now, something when you're watching Brisbane this week compared to when you're watching finals at other grounds is it's a centre bounce ground. And that means that the ground's a little shorter. Now, if you can come out of centre bounce with a clear kick, you end up with the ball in the goal square. So Brisbane have great centre bounce tactics, and so do GWS. They're two of the best teams out in the competition. So whoever's most effective in that part of the game will get maximum benefit. So let's say the game is decided by 2 goals. That margin could be a 2-goal differential in terms of centre bounce scores. That's how important it is. And it changes the way that you need to set up your forwards and defenders because the ball lands in a different spot. So a shorter ground, coming out of centre bounce, the ball's landing in a goal square compared to at the MCG, the ball's landing 30 metres out from goal. So when you're watching the game, watch centre bounce clearances, how clean they are, and how deep that they're getting. And again, you need to take out those interceptors pretty clearly. Haynes for GWS, who's pretty underrated, phenomenal player, and Harris Andrews at Brisbane.
Brilliant. So that's that. Not only the analytical deep dive, but the setting of the themes for what's to come this semi-final weekend. Geelong, West Coast, skinny control versus lateral control. Lions versus Giants. Rock, scissors, paper versus Ferrari formula. That's going to colour my weekend. Great to have you as part of it. So we'll, again, next week, checklist, and then you'll set up the prelims for it. Enjoy watching them.
Thanks, Jared.
Craig Jennings, there's a different mind at work, a different way to think about your footy heading towards the weekend. Rachel Griffiths is going to join me shortly. Ride Like a Girl to hit cinemas soon. Let's check in with Meredith in the newsroom.